It was still dark outside when the faint buzz of Lucas's phone pulled me from sleep. I could hear the vibration rattling on his nightstand, each pulse echoing in the silence of our bedroom. I turned over, half awake, catching a glimpse of him sitting on the edge of the bed, his broad back hunched as he stared at the screen. "What is it?" I murmured, my voice thick with sleep. "Nothing," he replied too quickly, his voice clipped. He silenced the phone, shoving it into the pocket of his pajama pants, and stood abruptly. "Go back to sleep." The tension in his shoulders was impossible to miss, but I didn't push. That had been our unspoken rule for years. If one of us wanted space, the other gave it. I watched him shuffle out of the bedroom, his steps barely audible against the carpet, before the door closed softly behind him. I stared at the ceiling for a while, my mind heavy with curiosity and unease. The familiarity of our room, the patterned curtains I'd picked out, the faint scent of lavender from the diffuser on my nightstand, usually comforted me. Tonight it felt suffocating. Eventually, I fell back asleep, but the unease lingered, a shadow at the edge of my dreams. The next morning, Lucas was gone before I woke up. It wasn't unusual for him to leave early, especially when there was a problem at the shop. He ran a small woodworking business, specializing in custom furniture, and while it wasn't a huge operation, it kept him busy. I tried to shake off the strange feeling from the night before, throwing myself into my morning routine. Emily, our 7-year-old daughter, was already at the kitchen table, her curly brown hair a tangled mess. She was concentrating on a picture she was drawing with her crayons, her tongue poking out slightly as she worked. "Good morning, sweet pea," I said, kissing the top of her head. "Morning, Mom." She didn't look up, her tiny hands gripping a purple crayon as she added a sun to her drawing. "I'm making a picture for Daddy. It's us at the park." I smiled, though my heart twinged. Emily idolized Lucas. In her eyes, he was a superhero who could fix anything, whether it was a broken toy or a scraped knee. I wished I still saw him that way. After dropping Emily off at school, I headed to the office. My job as an HR manager at a mid-sized tech company wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. I'd worked hard to build a solid reputation, though lately, I'd felt restless, like I was missing something. That restlessness was part of the reason I hadn't been able to resist Ethan's attention. Ethan Hayes, my boss, was everything Lucas wasn't. Polished, charming, effortlessly confident. He had a way of making everyone in the office feel like they were the most important person in the room, and I wasn't immune to it. At first, it had been harmless, an extra compliment here, a lingering glance there. But over time, it had become more. That morning, as I sat at my desk, my phone buzzed with a text. My stomach tightened when I saw Ethan's name on the screen. "Had fun yesterday. Looking forward to seeing you at the retreat." The retreat. I'd almost forgotten. It was supposed to be a team-building weekend at a fancy resort an hour outside the city. Ethan had been unusually insistent that I attend, and now, knowing Lucas's suspicions, I wasn't sure it was a good idea. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before I replied, "I'll be there." The moment I hit send, I regretted it. Lucas came home late that evening, his face drawn and tired. He greeted Emily with a tired smile and kissed her goodnight before joining me in the kitchen. I was chopping vegetables for dinner, trying to focus on the mundane task rather than the growing distance between us. "How was your day?" I asked, keeping my tone light. He hesitated, his gaze fixed on the counter. "Fine. Busy." His voice was flat, almost mechanical. "Lucas?" I set the knife down, turning to face him. "What's going on?" His jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, placing it on the counter between us. The screen was dark, but I could feel the weight of whatever he was about to say. "I got a text last night," he said finally, "from an unknown number." My heart thudded in my chest. What did it say? Lucas met my eyes, his expression unreadable. It said, "Our little secret is safe, but Lucas doesn't need to know." For a moment, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. My mind raced, searching for an explanation, a lie, anything that would make sense of this. That's strange, I said, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to me. Maybe it's a prank. Is it? His voice was low, and there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before, doubt. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I turned back to the cutting board, my hands trembling as I picked up the knife again. I don't know what you're accusing me of, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. But I'm not doing anything wrong. Lucas didn't reply. The silence between us was louder than any argument. The retreat was supposed to be an escape, a chance to clear my head and figure out what to do. But when I arrived at the resort, the tension only grew. Ethan was everywhere. Laughing with colleagues at the bar, his hand brushing against my arm during a group activity, his smile lingering just a little too long. By the second day, I couldn't take it anymore. I found him in the hallway outside the conference room, his tie loosened and a glass of whiskey in his hand. We need to talk, I said, my voice trembling. He looked at me with that infuriating smirk, the one that had once made me feel special but now felt predatory. About what? This. I gestured between us. It has to stop. Ethan tilted his head, studying me like a puzzle he was trying to solve. You seemed fine with it before. Well, I'm not fine now. Before I could say more, a voice interrupted us. Am I interrupting something? I turned to see Lucas standing at the end of the hallway, his expression unreadable. My blood ran cold. What are you doing here? I stammered. Funny, I was about to ask you the same thing, he said, his tone icy. I opened my mouth to explain, but the words caught in my throat. This wasn't how I'd imagined him finding out. Not like this. Lucas's face was unreadable, but his voice carried an edge I hadn't heard before. My chest tightened as I stood frozen, feeling Ethan's eyes on me as Lucas took a step closer. Didn't expect to see you here, Lucas said, his tone dangerously calm. Isn't this a team retreat? Family not invited. Ethan recovered first, sliding effortlessly into his usual charm. Ah, you must be Lucas. Sophia's mentioned you. I'm Ethan, her boss. He extended his hand as if this were some polite introduction at a company picnic instead of the middle of a crisis. Lucas didn't take the hand. Yeah, I've heard about you too. Ethan's smile faltered for a split second before he smoothly retracted his hand. I'll let you two talk, he said, flashing me a look that I couldn't decipher. Then, as casually as he'd entered the scene, he disappeared down the hall. Lucas waited until Ethan was gone before turning to me, his expression dark. Care to explain? My mouth went dry. Why are you here? I asked, stalling. How did you even? I asked you a question first, he interrupted, his voice sharper now. What the hell is going on, Sophia? I opened my mouth, then closed it, grappling for words that wouldn't make this worse. I didn't know you were coming, I said weakly. Stop avoiding the question. His voice was low, but the intensity behind it made me flinch. I've been trying to give you the benefit of the doubt, but then I find out you're at some fancy resort with your boss. The same guy who's been texting you at all hours? Do you even realize how this looks? It's not what you think, I said quickly, stepping closer. Lucas, please. Just don't lie to me, Sophia. The anger in his voice cracked, replaced by something raw and broken. I deserve better than this. The vulnerability in his tone made my chest ache, but before I could respond, he turned and walked away. The sound of his footsteps echoed down the empty hallway, leaving me standing there in silence. I leaned against the wall, my head spinning. He was right. I couldn't blame him for jumping to conclusions. But the truth was even more tangled than he knew, and I didn't know how to fix this without unraveling everything. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the look on Lucas's face, the hurt buried beneath the anger. It had been years since I'd seen him like that, since the night his father passed and he'd stayed up building a tiny wooden model, carving the pieces with hands that couldn't stop shaking. Back then, I'd been the one to comfort him, the one he trusted. Now, I didn't know if that trust could ever be repaired. The next morning, I found Ethan in the dining area, sipping coffee like he didn't have a care in the world. He looked up as I approached, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," I said, my voice firm. He gestured to the seat across from him. "By all means." I sat down, forcing myself to meet his gaze. "Whatever this is, it's over. I'm done. And I need you to stay away from my family." Ethan raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Are you sure about that? Because the way I see it, we've got something good here. Why throw it away?" I clenched my fists under the table. "This isn't a negotiation. If you care about your career, you'll leave me alone." For the first time, his mask slipped, and I saw something cold flicker in his eyes. "You might want to rethink that," he said quietly. "It would be a shame if Lucas found out everything." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm just saying we both have something to lose," he said, his voice deceptively casual. "Think carefully, Sophia." By the time I returned home that evening, I was a wreck. My mind raced with everything Ethan had implied, the veiled threat hanging over me like a storm cloud. Lucas barely looked at me when I walked in, his expression distant. I couldn't blame him. Emily ran to greet me, her arms wrapping tightly around my waist. Her warmth was the only thing anchoring me in that moment, and I knelt down to hug her back. "I missed you, Mommy," she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "I missed you too, sweet pea." My voice cracked, and I squeezed her tighter, guilt washing over me. "Daddy said he saw you yesterday," she said suddenly, pulling back to look at me. "At the hotel." My heart stopped. "What?" "He said he saw you with your boss," she said innocently. "Why was Daddy there?" I couldn't answer. The weight of her words pressed down on me, suffocating. Lucas had seen more than I realized, and I didn't know how to make this right. That night, as Lucas tucked Emily into bed, I stood in the hallway, listening to their quiet conversation. She giggled at something he said, and for a moment, everything felt normal. But it wasn't. I couldn't let this go on. Whatever Ethan had planned, I needed to figure it out before it destroyed us completely. The house was quiet after Emily fell asleep. Lucas stayed in her room longer than usual, and I could hear their muffled voices, her soft giggles punctuated by his low, steady murmurs. It was the kind of scene that used to fill me with comfort, but tonight, it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I sat in the living room, staring blankly at the cold cup of tea on the table. My thoughts were a storm, every possible scenario with Ethan playing out in my mind. He wouldn't stop at veiled threats. If he felt cornered, he'd destroy everything. My career, my marriage, even Emily's fragile sense of stability. Lucas emerged from Emily's room, his face shadowed with exhaustion. He stopped when he saw me, his hand gripping the doorframe. "We need to talk," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he crossed the room and sat down on the armchair across from me, his posture guarded. "Okay," he said. "Talk." The weight of the moment pressed on my shoulders. I opened my mouth, then closed it, searching for the right words. "I made a mistake," I began, my voice trembling. "I let things with Ethan get too personal. It wasn't physical, but I crossed a line. And I'm sorry." Lucas's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening. "Too personal? What does that even mean?" "It means I got caught up in the attention," I admitted. "He made me feel seen, and I was stupid enough to let it go too far. But I swear it wasn't an affair. Nothing happened." Lucas let out a bitter laugh, leaning forward. "Do you think that makes it better? That it wasn't physical?" I looked down, tears stinging my eyes. "I know I've hurt you, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But Ethan isn't just some flirtatious boss. He's dangerous, Lucas. He's been manipulating me, and now he's threatening to destroy everything if I don't play along." Lucas's eyes narrowed, his anger momentarily giving way to suspicion. "Threatening you? How?" I hesitated, then pulled out my phone. "He said he'd tell you things, twist them to make it sound worse than it is. And if that doesn't work, he'll use his position to make sure I lose my job. He wants control, and I've been too scared to stand up to him." Lucas stared at the phone, then back at me. Why didn't you come to me sooner? Because I was ashamed, I whispered. And because I didn't know if you'd believe me. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. Lucas rubbed his hands over his face, letting out a heavy sigh. What do you want me to do? He asked finally. I blinked, caught off guard. What? I said, what do you want me to do? His tone was tired, but there was a glimmer of resolve in his eyes. You're not handling this alone, Sophia, so tell me what you need. The tears I'd been holding back spilled over, and I covered my face with my hands. Lucas didn't move, but the fact that he hadn't walked out gave me the strength to speak. We need proof, I said, my voice shaky. Something that shows what he's been doing. If we can expose him, we can stop him. Lucas nodded, the tension in his shoulders shifting into something steadier. Okay, then we'll get proof. The plan came together quickly. Over the next few days, I acted as if everything was normal, responding to Ethan's texts with cautious enthusiasm. Lucas and I barely spoke except to coordinate our strategy, the unspoken weight of our fractured relationship hanging between us. Finally, the opportunity came. Ethan invited me to his office after hours to discuss things privately, a clear attempt to reel me further into his web. I went, wearing a wire Lucas had borrowed from a friend who worked security. The encounter was every bit as slimy as I'd expected. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his smile predatory as he spoke. You're making the right choice, he said, his voice oozing confidence. Lucas doesn't have to know. We can keep this between us. And if I don't? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Ethan's smile hardened. Then things get messy. I'd hate to see Lucas lose his business over something avoidable. And Emily? She deserves better than parents in the middle of a scandal. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to nod. You're right, I said. This is for the best. The next morning, Lucas and I turned the recording over to HR and a lawyer. The fallout was swift. Ethan was fired, his reputation in shambles, but the legal battle dragged on for months. Lucas stood by me through it all, though our relationship remained strained. In the end, Ethan's career was ruined, but he avoided jail time through a settlement. Lucas and I sat in silence outside the courthouse on the day it was finalized, the weight of everything that had happened hanging between us. I'm sorry, I said, breaking the silence. Lucas looked at me, his expression unreadable. I know you are, he said, but that doesn't fix this. I nodded, tears slipping down my cheeks. I'll do whatever it takes to fix it. I just don't know if it's enough. He didn't respond right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. I don't know either. We sat there until the sun dipped below the horizon, the silence saying everything we couldn't. Some wounds take longer to heal than others, and some scars never fade. But as we walked to the car together, I held on to the faintest hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back. Thanks for watching. What would you do in their place? Share your thoughts in the comments and explore more stories on our channel.